When you look at this image, how does it make you feel? What about this one? All of them displayed one after another. Do they make you feel old, young, like you're looking at a world that doesn't exist anymore? These are the images curated by the Twitter account Mytho America, each one deliberately chosen to evoke that exact feeling, like you're looking at a world that doesn't exist anymore. In fact, that exact phrase or variations on it show up regularly in the comments. Whether it's the framing or the amateur nature of each image or the implications of decay hanging just outside of frame, or maybe it's just digital photography with a heavy flash, but each image evokes a strong feeling of nostalgia, and a lot of it is nostalgia for the 2000s. In the past few years, I've begun to see it pop up, nostalgia bait for my generation, and honestly, I'm just happy to be included. Nostalgia is an industry unto itself. Tribute bands and remake after remake and reboot after reboot, Mytho America and all the associated Twitter accounts are part of it too. I mean, every decade is back right now. The 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even the aughts are back now. There are thousands of accounts and TV shows and movies and businesses that exist just to remind people that things used to be better. And I feel it happening to me too. It feels like an inevitable part of the human experience. My brother just got into the NBA, and every time he brings up like an old player, I feel like a symbiote taking over me. No, Paul George hasn't always been a bum. He was great in the 2013 Eastern Conference Finals. Trust me, I was there. And in that, I found myself drawn over and over again to Mytho America, a reminder of a better, simpler time. But as I liked and bookmarked different posts, the algorithm began to show me dozens of similar accounts. Images of the rural South and borderline liminal spaces and teenagers dressed up in the fashion of the 2000s, and then more accounts, edits of the 70s and movies of the 80s and Americana. And as I fell deeper and deeper down this nostalgia bait rabbit hole, I began to find a dark center at the core of this obsession with the past. Yikes. Today we're talking about nostalgia. Why was the past so great? Why is the present so terrible? And why both of those questions are more complicated than you think. Act 1. The past. Memory. The past written in the direction of feeling. David Shields. Cultural nostalgia in this day and age is made up of two primary factors, the first being the past was great, and the second being the present is terrible. Mytho and many of the associated accounts believe that. As he states in the essay that serves as the thesis for his account, America has not felt as demonstrable a decline in a lifetime. In fact, a plurality of Americans believe that too, that the 2020s as a decade are the worst decade for music and television and morality and society, etc., etc. But if we're accepting Mythos' premise at face value that this is the decline, then when was the peak? What was the best time to be alive? According to a major poll, we actually have the answer. Let's talk music, which over 30% of Americans say this is the worst decade for music ever. Take a guess, go into the comments. What was the best year? You might guess 1968 or 1991, but you're wrong, probably. It turns out the best year for music, according to Americans, was, drumroll, whatever year you were 17. See, when YouGov ran a poll asking Americans what the best and worst decades were for a number of categories, they couldn't find a pattern until they started controlling for age. And it's not just music. It turns out for all of the arts, the biggest predictor of taste isn't objective quality, it's when you were born. But what I find even more interesting is that the poll found equally age-based views on society. And while art and entertainment is more correlated with being a late teenager, these views are based around being even younger. Regardless if you were born in 1995 or 1955, when polled, Americans generally thought that the most tight-knit communities existed when you were 4. The least political division existed when you were 10. The country was the most moral when you were 8. Life was simpler back then, regardless of when then was. It turns out nostalgia is an individual experience and not a collective one. And of course, things actually were better. Why? Well, there are two main reasons. You were a kid. 75% of the time that you spend with your parents will be over by the age of 12. 40% of Americans say that families are the least happy today. 100% of the people who responded to this poll are over the age of 12. And of course families were better when you were a kid. It's way easier to be a kid than it is to be a parent. Children have less responsibilities. I've been seeing nostalgia bait content for like the late 2000s, like 2008 and 2009. Yeah, your experience as a child in 2009 is wildly different than your parents' experience in 2009. There was some stuff going on. And, more importantly, number 2, memory isn't reliable at all. There's a phenomenon called rosy retrospection. It's a cognitive bias. Basically, we're biologically hardwired to remember the best parts of the past. Studies show that the intense feelings of unpleasant experiences fade dramatically quicker than the intense feelings of pleasant experiences. When all else is equal, we recall the past as more positive than it was actually experienced. For example, you know when you go through a breakup and then for the next couple of weeks after, all you can think about is the good times? And you're like, we shouldn't have let those petty squabbles get to us. And then you get back together and you're like, whoa, petty squabbles got hands. When you think of your childhood or a year ago or even a week ago, you're much more likely to remember the broad strokes. When I look at a photo from Mytho-America, I remember the joy of hanging out with my friends or visiting family, but I don't think, hey, maybe that day I was really anxious or I was hungry or I got into a fight with my brother. Our memories take a scene like this and turn it into a scene like this. And then we frame it and hang it up on the walls in our mind, and eventually all of that stuff that was happening out of frame disappears. And in addition to rosy retrospection, there's something called the reminiscence bump. Essentially, it's the idea that when asked to recall autobiographical memories, there's a huge boost to our adolescence. So when you combine that with rosy retrospection, what's actually happening is your brain is more intensely remembering something as better than it was. And I'm not just saying that from an outside perspective. Like, I didn't live through the 1970s. I can't tell you whether it was actually awesome or terrible at the time, but I did live through 2016. I've been seeing a lot of stuff recently about how 2016 was the last great year and like average day in 2016, and it's a photo of like a dolphin jumping over a rainbow. And I feel like I'm being psyop because remember in 2016 when all day, every day, everyone was just talking about how terrible 2016 was, how it was the worst year ever? Literally, here's a thread on Reddit of somebody asking why everyone thinks 2016 is the worst year ever. And then somebody in the comments responds and is like, everyone is asking this question too much. Or the fact that the New York Times posted an opinion piece on how it was a terrible year. We've become nostalgic for a period of our life that never felt like that when we were going through it. We have a tendency to reappraise the past because all of the problems seemed bearable, because we bared them. So when we're looking at the decline of the world, we can't really tell when the peak was because we're not really able to objectively appraise the past. The 2000s I remember and the 2000s that you remember are different. And the 70s that you might remember are probably wildly different than the 70s that your parents remembered. And everything everyone is remembering is actually different than what it felt like to experience it. Today in 2025, 2016 was a good year because it was a simpler time, even though it didn't feel that simple when we were going through it. Are we doomed to just forever ask ourselves, if only we knew then how good we had it? Act 2, the present, skibbity toilet, and the kids these days. When I was growing up, the butt of every joke was the millennial. Lensless glasses, avocado toast, Netflix, they were bankrupting industry after industry. And then in the past couple of years, I witnessed something change in front of me. I do stand-up and I watched it happen in real time. The butt of every joke changed from millennials to Gen Z, which I'm not complaining about. I capitalize on it too.
Any Gen Z fans in the room? I'm looking at you. You guys are Gen Z.
But what really surprised me the most was after decades of being the butt of the joke, the millennials were the ones laughing the hardest at the Gen Z jokes. I'd imagine they'd have more empathy, but they just moved up in the cycle. And then a couple of weeks ago, I read that Michael Bay had begun production on the Skibbity Toilet movie. And I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be bad. As a Gen Z, I rebuke the petty interests of Gen Alpha. They're not into the cool stuff that me and my friends were into. And I was nodding along with every comment, being like, this is the end of cinema, this movie's terrible, what's this world coming to? And then I thought about it. Not only had I never watched Skibbity Toilet before, I'd never even heard an opinion on it from a person I respect. I was deriding something just because it was popular amongst Gen Alpha. The same thing that happens to everyone else was happening to me. So why is that? Kids today really are worse. That's a sentiment I see a lot of online. Kids today are rude, their parents aren't disciplining them enough. Here's some quotes that I found in like 2 minutes. Kids these days have it too easy. They expect everything to be handed to them without the slightest effort to earn anything in their part. The great danger that faces the home life of today is that young people have things too easy because of what their parents do for them. And it's not just online. For example, the first two quotes that I used were actually from newspapers published in 1910 and 1956. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. That last quote is from Socrates from like 400 BC. Paul Ferry is a researcher from the University of Calgary, and he's got a great collection online of headlines and articles that show we've been having these same conversations around children for a very long time. Are our children too soft to face the world? 1961. School is too easy for kids. 1888. Kids these days are disrespectful. 1853. It's very strange to see the same complaints levied against kids today that were levied against the generation that went on to fight in World War II. Or you go back to the Socrates quote from the time of the Peloponnesian War. When I saw the switch happen from millennial jokes to Gen Z jokes, the thing that amazed me was the content of the jokes barely changed at all, only the nouns, except now millennials were laughing at it. And in 40 years, I'll be at a show next to some Gen Alpha guy. I'll be like, oh, you guys are all right. At least you're not like Gen Beta and their Neuralinks and their robot nannies or whatever. It's just hard for me to believe that the best kids ever were from Socrates' generation, and ever since then, every generation's gotten worse and worse. Maybe it's not that kids these days are dumb and rude and like stupid things. Maybe it turns out kids in general are just a little rude and a little dumb and like stupid things. When it comes to the court of public opinion, you and I just have the advantage that our childhood happened in the past. And I bring this up because children are the future, whatever. They're the perfect example of the present. And we are biased towards the past and against the present. In a study, couples who went on different vacations were asked to rank their level of enjoyment and satisfaction with the trip, before they went on it, during it, and after the trip was over. And universally, during the middle of the trip, at the only point where they were actually on vacation, the couples expressed the highest levels of stress and disappointment. But after the trip, when it was over and done and had faded into memory, they overwhelmingly loved it. They were glad they went and had the best time, and let's do it again next year. The couple's least favorite part of the trip was the trip, the middle section. But in time, they became nostalgic for that thing, that middle part that never really happened. It had become something new in their memory. Which I think explains some of the data that we got from that poll about how many Americans view this as the worst decade. The thing that strikes me is that some of these categories that they're polling on actually aren't subjective. 40% of Americans think the 2020s have the worst crime of any decade. That is objectively, mathematically not true. Violent crime in the US, where the poll takes place, is less than half of what it was in the 1990s, and it's lower than it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. Most Americans in this poll say that the economy today is worse than the economy of the 1930s or the Great Recession. 30% say that this is the worst decade for music. There is more music released in a single day today than there is in all of 1989 combined. My Discover Weekly on Spotify recommended me a band that makes medieval country songs with a 1950s Western lens. There's something for everyone. If you can't find music that you like today, that's a skill issue. In 1996, Val Kilmer was nominated for Razzies for 2 separate roles. But when he passed away recently, nobody remembered him from those roles or from 10 Commandments the Musical, a real film in which he apparently starred. No, they remembered him from Tombstone or Heat. 10 years from now, nobody's going to be talking about JoJo Siwa's Betty Davis Eyes cover, but let the record show in July 2025, we were talking about it. And I bring up the kids these days element because unlike art or entertainment or culture, which can be taste-based, I think we can all relate to growing up and to getting older. It's a cycle that we can't avoid, and yet we all act like we're the first ones discovering it. I posted a video a couple months ago about irony and Gen Z, and I was really interested to see all of the comments from people from different generations talking about how they went through the same thing. It was eye-opening for me. I know that generations discourse has become much more prevalent in recent years, and I think part of that is because it's the last socially acceptable form of tribalism that you're allowed to do. But the thing that interests me the most is generation by generation, we're all basically exactly the same. Anatomically, modern humans have been around for like 100,000 years. The biggest difference between me and my grandparents and their grandparents and up and up and up is really just when we were born. It's so narcissistic to think that you or your generation is like the exception to this cycle, as though human history peaked right around your time in the sun, and yet all of us do it. Jazz music at one point was transgressive in the language of the youth. Napoleon wouldn't let his soldiers read novels, only histories. Socrates thought the kids these days were going to lose it by learning how to read. Even as I react negatively to the Skibbity Toilet movie, some 9-year-old is going to go see it in theaters with their friends, and it will be a transcendent moment for them, and that will become their good old days. We always think the boundaries our generation pushed are just as far as boundaries should go. We're not capable of appraising the present, not because of reverence for the past, but because of reverence for our past. When you were a teenager, I'm sure everyone told you, oh, these are the best days, make sure to appreciate them, and you'd roll your eyes and wouldn't believe them. I did that, and only now that we're older and no longer on that vacation are we capable of appreciating those times. And in 20 years, we'll look back and be like, oh, the 2020s, they had some nice moments. Act 3, the future. There's an essay that's the pinned tweet on Mytho America's account, The Aesthetics of the End, the secret behind Mytho America. It's about ceremony, the holidays, and their place in the American myth. There's a religiousness to it. They contrast the images of the ritual of Christmas and Thanksgiving, but mostly it's an exploration for what the account is attempting to achieve. Through the myriad of mysterious and captionless posts, the consensus seemed to be that Mytho America is a nostalgia account, though that never felt right to me. Sure, many of the images I share are sweet memories from a recent past, but many aren't so wistful. At times you'll see scenes explicitly in the current day, and others that are not warm but nightmarish. I'm gonna let you in on a secret. The end is near. We're losing something, so Mytho says. The clues are in our towns, our families, our food, our institutions. Some gothic apparition has marked every place and object that we've held close to us, cursing them to wither and cheapen in what feels like a spell. That's what the world looks like to a lot of people, maybe even to you. In my explorations into Mytho America, I stumbled across dozens of similar nostalgia accounts dedicated to posting edits or clips of movies from the 70s and lots of white teenagers watching fireworks. And to those accounts, that's also what the world looks like now. But these other accounts that exist within the same vein as Mytho, their nostalgia isn't for love of the game. It's not even an exploration as Mythos claims to be. It's ideological. And many of them are based off of the ideology that there was something great that doesn't exist anymore, that was taken from you. And a lot of them aren't that subtle about who they think took it. The same accounts that are posting and retweeting this are also posting this. Many of these accounts are subtle about it. They don't outright say it, barring the rare slip-up, but the accounts they retweet and engage with do. Not only do I disagree with what they're saying, but to justify it using declinism, which is the idea that a society or institution is headed towards decline, is stupid. Declinism is not a new idea. In fact, the only reason we call it declinism is because it's based off of a title of a book, The Decline of the West, published in 1918, far before any of these heights that these accounts claim we need to return to. Much like conversations around kids, people have been decrying the state of the world in civilization for time immemorial. I definitely think the quality of life was better 50 years ago than it is now. It's ridiculous. 1982. He thinks that social and political conditions were better 50 years ago, 1890. And here's a fun one. Just as in Rome before it fell, women are becoming more masculine and men more feminine, 1934. Yes, the famously emasculine men of the 1930s who went on to fight in World War II. To me, to assume that this is the end and it's all built up to this is the same level of hubris as the generations discussion. Just as we all agree that kids these days are spoiled and we were perfect, the logical extension of that is just that the world is going down the gutter. And as I went down this nostalgia rabbit hole and liked things, the algorithm kept showing me more and more stuff. And all of a sudden, all of my feed was like posts about how awesome the 80s were. I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, women shouldn't vote. I'm like, what? And they're like, there's a correlation between eye color and success. Like some 1930s stuff. Captions like, an America of 100 million, and they know which 100 million they want. Or Millions Must Live, which is a play on Billions Must Die. And not only do I disagree with that, but it's crazy to justify any of that worldview based off of nostalgia. They're using these edits and videos and music and mimetic imagery to create a casus belli to justify their worldview. Look at these clips of great times. Everything used to be better. But try this out. You can look at the front page of any New York Times paper from the past 100 years. The glorious 70s and 80s still had riots, and the Cold War, and the 50s and 60s had some problems too. Even if you weren't alive during those times, the nostalgia you feel is so easily manipulated. This video right here seems like a simpler time that we should go back to, a time of dignity and warmth and family. But pan out, it was filmed in 1940s Germany, at Hitler's house. And that video was posted by the same guy who posted this one. And the times that we did live through, that version of the world that lives in our mind never really existed. 2016 you didn't want to live in 2016, and maybe now you do. The etymology of the word nostalgia comes from the word nostos, which means homecoming, and algos, which means pain, homesickness. And not to be the friend that's too woke, but there's no amount of any of this that's going to make you 9 again. As I was writing out this essay, I've been preparing to move, and I stumbled across a box of my old things, and I found my old baseball glove from when I was a kid. There was another adult-sized glove in there, and when I asked my brother to play catch with me, I let him use that one. Somehow it felt wrong to use any glove other than the one I'd spent almost every day growing up wearing. We threw the ball around for the first time in years, and it felt amazing. Lobs, sidearms, it just felt natural. My glove felt like an extension of myself. And then my left wrist started to hurt. To keep the glove on my hand, I had to hold it at this awkward angle because the glove was too small. My hand was too big for it, and no amount of readjustments or fixes would make it stop hurting. We had to go in. Even if I woke up tomorrow and it was 2007 again, that glove wouldn't fit me. The glove hadn't changed, but I had. This isn't a video about politics. This is a video about cognitive biases, about how the human experience is incredibly subjective, how our memory often lies to us, and about how our perception is often wrong. I mean, every time you recall a memory, your brain rewrites it. And I also want to say, we're talking about general trends here. If you were hit by a car in 1995, it doesn't really matter how old you are. 1995 probably was a bad year. Your 2020s might be going bad. They've been some wild years. I get it. There's no amount of nostalgia that's going to make somebody who lived through the Dust Bowl miss the Dust Bowl. I also know there will be comments pointing out any single bad thing that's happening in the world right now. And whatever you're about to comment, you don't need to. I agree. Whatever thing that you think that's bad is happening, I think it's bad too. But, to quote Mytho, one of the things I explore with Mytho America is the phenomenon of nostalgia. How, for example, even the rancid chocolate milk we drink in school will eventually be remembered as sweet to the heart. There's no way for the chocolate milk of the present to taste as good as the chocolate milk of the past, because the chocolate milk of the past only tastes that good in retrospect, and this moment will be in retrospect for us one day too. I don't think that nostalgia is evil. I actually think it's great in a lot of ways. I think the reason that we love the music of our adolescence and the families of our childhood and our generations is that that's a celebration of the life that we've lived and the people that we've lived through it with. Culture is a celebration of life, and nostalgia is a celebration of the culture of our lifetimes. I just don't think it should be used to put down people and things that are happening now, because how can anything hold up to the past that we've created in our heads? In the oddly moving words of Jordan Peterson about a plastic water bottle, there are cathedrals everywhere for those with the eyes to see. One day you're going to see these cathedrals, even if they were never really here, so you might as well try seeing them now. Maybe the 2020s aren't the best decade ever, who knows? But I do know we're all on vacation, and I don't want to have to wait for it to be over to appreciate it.